to attack with a mere 1,000 troops. My country seems to be underestimated to a great extent. Don't you think so too? Now, for the first time in a few years, let us get together for the unveiling of the 8 grand crops. Ladies and gentlemen, let us get fancy. Tactics Chronicle, using the 4th gen of virtual reality. One of the many works that has been produced using the full sensory projection method. The game, our main character was a state management RPG. It was not a trendy game, but the reason this work became popular was because of the game representation of a fantasy world in reality. The story begins with our main character waking up in an unfamiliar place. The first thing he sees is an endless grassland stretching as far as the eye can see. The next thing he senses is the gentle wind brushing against him and the earthy smell of nature surrounding him. A rush of excitement surges through him as he clenches his fist, his heart pounding with anticipation. He realizes this is the start of his journey in a new game, Tactics Chronicle. A wide grin spreads across his face as he embraces the thought of beginning a thrilling adventure and working toward building his dream nation. Time flies, and the one who had once started this journey with nothing now stands at the pinnacle of it. He rises proudly to gaze upon his glorious kingdom, a kingdom of monsters built entirely by his own hands. He strides forward, heading toward the Grand Assembly where his loyal army awaits his arrival. Army generals have aligned their troops in perfect formation, standing tall and ready. As he approaches, thunderous chants erupt from the soldiers. "All hail his majesty!" The sight of this massive, disciplined army fills him with pride and satisfaction. The sheer scale of his forces is a testament to his efforts, and he can't help but marvel at the spectacular display before him. After countless twists and turns, his nation Alchimaiera has risen to become a superpower. Now, it is time for a grand celebration marking the 150th anniversary of the nation's founding. I can see the results of all the hard work I've poured into this. It's deeply moving. However, not everything has been smooth. Recently, a group of orcs had been planning a rebellion against him, aiming to disrupt the national celebrations. They went to great lengths to challenge his authority, but in the end, they surrendered before he even had a chance to crush them. Despite the victory, he feels a faint sense of incompleteness, like a climactic moment was missing. With this thought lingering in his mind, he knows it's time for her to arrive. He smirks knowingly, counting down to the exact second. After all, he has memorized the precise patterns of all the NPCs in his kingdom and goes through the chamber. Without hesitation, he grants permission to enter. The door creaks open and a beast girl steps into the room. Her sharp ears twitch slightly as she bows deeply before him. "Your Majesty," she says in a clear, emotionless voice. "The preparations for the national celebrations have been completed. Please proceed to the platform when you are ready." Helen looks at her for a moment, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thank you. Muv, platform. Follow me." His words are deliberate. The system's key commands seamlessly integrated. The beast girl, Reeve, nods again. "Understood." Her tone remains devoid of emotion, just like her expression. This was how all NPC interactions in Tactics Chronicle has been designed, functional and efficient. As Helen steps forward, he catches sight of her neutral expression. A small, knowing smirk curls on his lips. Reeve was no ordinary NPC. She was one of the first 3 NPCs he had attained from the gacha system when he began his journey in this game. Reeve had started as a low-ranked beast girl, no different from any other basic character. The other 2 beginner NPCs he acquired were a low-ranked demon cat and a rare species of elf. Yet, these 3, once insignificant, had grown into first-class commanders under his care and guidance. Now, Reeve commands the 1st Corps of Alchimaiera, while her fellow starters lead the 2nd and 3rd Corps. Alongside the countless other NPCs he had acquired, the most powerful among them now command the 8 Grand Corps of Alchimaiera. Helen had personally trained and nurtured them all, elevating them from their humble beginnings to their current status. As he walks with Reeve toward the platform, he finds himself overcome by nostalgia. The 150th anniversary of Alchimaiera's foundation wasn't just a celebration of his kingdom, it was a milestone that brought back memories of his journey. From humble beginnings to the powerful nation it is now. He had poured countless hours into building this legacy. For a moment, his vision blurs as his eyes well up with tears. "How sentimental," he mutters to himself with a small chuckle. He wasn't one to get emotional often, but today felt different. He suddenly remembers the speech he was supposed to deliver. But, as always, he hadn't prepared anything in advance. Not that it mattered. For Helen, the content of the speech was irrelevant. Giving the speech itself was just a part of the role-playing experience, an integral part of being the ruler of this grand nation. As he approaches the platform, the ground beneath his feet begins to tremble violently. His kingdom shakes and an intense, blinding light engulfs everything. The capital, the platform, Reeve, and Helen himself. Helen stumbles, falling to the ground from the force of the tremor. For a moment, confusion overtakes him. His first thought is that this must be a bug or perhaps an in-game natural disaster event. But the intensity of it feels far too real. "Your Majesty," "Are you alright?" Reeves' calm voice cuts through the chaos as she kneels beside him, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," Helen replies, brushing himself off and rising to his feet. There's a flicker of irritation in his voice as he mutters, "What were the developers thinking, starting a random event in the middle of the celebration? How ridiculous, Doc." But when he looks around, his irritation turns to shock. The world he once knew, the carefully crafted capital surrounded by familiar terrain, has changed completely. The vast plains, the rivers, the mountains, and the landmarks he had memorized are gone. Instead, his capital now stands a dense, unfamiliar forest. Towering trees surround the city walls, their thick canopies blotting out the sky. For a moment, Helen is frozen, trying to comprehend what has just happened. This wasn't a natural disaster event. It wasn't a bug. The kingdom itself remained intact, untouched by the chaos, but the land surrounding it was entirely different. This must be some sort of terrain-altering magic, he mutters to himself. His thoughts race as he tries to come up with an explanation. Within the capital, the 3rd and 4th Corps had been stationed. Without wasting any time, Helen issues a command to Reeve. "Return. Office." Reeve nods and replies, "Understood," before moving swiftly to carry out his orders. Helen rushed toward his office, determined to gather information about the strange phenomenon that had engulfed his kingdom. Upon arriving, he immediately attempted to use the orb, the primary tool to observe the surroundings of his capital. To his frustration, the orb was completely inaccessible for reasons unknown. His next instinct was to open the map, a vital resource in Tactics Chronicle for navigation and strategy. However, the map only displayed the immediate vicinity of the capital. Beyond its borders, the entire area was shrouded in grey, signaling that it was unexplored territory. A sinking feeling crept into Helen's chest. "No way. It can't be a forced transfer," he muttered to himself, his tone laced with disbelief. Forced transfers were among the rarest and most dreaded events in the game. They teleported players and their bases to uncharted territories, essentially resetting progress in terms of exploration. But this was unprecedented. He had never heard of an entire capital being forcefully transferred. Then again, the management team behind Tactics Chronicle was infamous for its chaotic decisions and unpredictable behavior. Their engineers had a reputation for poor judgment, often implementing extreme and nonsensical game mechanics without any forewarning. Considering their track record, Helen couldn't dismiss the idea that they might have gone so far as to move his entire kingdom out of the blue. As these thoughts raced through his mind, a trembling voice broke his concentration. "Your Majesty, what is happening?" Reeve asked, her voice carrying a hint of fear. Helen turned to look at her, slightly startled. Fear. That wasn't like her. Reeve, one of his most loyal and brave commanders, was never one to show fear, no matter how dire the situation. For her to display such an emotion was unsettling. Could it be a fear anomaly? A fear anomaly, Helen thought to himself. Fear anomalies were rare status effects that could influence NPC behavior. If Reeve, of all people, was showing fear, this might be far more difficult than he initially anticipated. Too many unknown variables were at play. Taking a deep breath, Helen composed himself and addressed Reeve. "It seems the capital of our nation has been forcefully summoned to an unknown location," he explained calmly. "For now, we need to assess the current state of the kingdom. I'll be sending minimal instructions to each commander. Your job is to contact them and collect much information as possible." As always, he used system keywords while issuing these commands. Reeve, understanding his instructions, straightened up and nodded, her fear quickly replaced by her usual resolve. "Understood, Your Majesty," she said before rushing out of the office to fulfill her orders. Once she had left, Helen wasted no time. He opened the tactical window, a feature that allowed him to issue direct orders to his corps. The 3rd and 4th Corps, stationed within the capital, would be his first point of contact. He needed to know their readiness and if they had encountered any anomalies during the transfer. His hands moved swiftly, preparing detailed orders for each of the 8 Grand Corps. With a determined and energized voice, Helion opened the communication channel to his commanders. "Everyone, this is Helion. We have an emergency situation. Suspend the nation-founding celebration festival immediately and follow my orders to address the problem." His voice rang with authority as he began issuing precise orders to the 8 Grand Corps. "First Division, continue supporting me directly as my assistant as usual. I'll rely on you for immediate coordination. 2nd Division, ensure the safety of the citizens and maintain order within the capital. 3rd Division, treat the wounded and inspect the barrier around the capital for any signs of damage. Ensure its integrity. 4th Division, investigate the surrounding area beyond the capital and report any findings. 5th Division, support the 2nd Division in emergency relief efforts, assisting injured citizens and repairing damaged houses. 6th Division, cooperate with the 4th Division and focus on gathering detailed information about our current location and any potential threats. 7th Division, inspect all facilities within the capital and begin repairs where needed. 8th Division, monitor the perimeter from the sky, scout the surroundings, but avoid provoking neighboring countries. Your top priority is to gather intel and keep the people calm. After issuing the orders, Helion leaned back slightly and exhaled. That should cover everything for now. All that's left is to wait for reports to come in. Despite his composed demeanor, irritation simmered beneath the surface. Really? Putting this kind of event right in the middle of the nation founding celebration festival. How scummy can the admins get? He muttered to himself. It was so typical of them to throw curveballs like this. He was sure other players would file complaints about this nonsense later, even if the event itself turned out to be interesting. To distract himself, he decided to check with the other kings in the game, hoping to get some insight into whether they were experiencing the same event. However, when he accessed the communication interface, a chilling realization struck him. No one else was online. What the? Am I the only one here? He whispered, his disbelief growing. Before he could dwell further, a sudden knock at the door pulled him back to the moment. Without hesitation, Helion used the system command, allo entry. The door opened, and Reeve stepped in, her expression uncharacteristically distressed. Helion immediately noticed her demeanor. Reeve. Is the situation really that grim? He asked, his tone laced concern. Reeve bowed slightly before answering. I'm afraid so, Your Majesty. This situation is unlike anything we've encountered before. It's complicated. She continued the report, her voice calm but tinged with unease. First, the capital is completely surrounded by a dense forest. According to the 6th Division's observations, the forest seems to emit an illusion effect. However, it's difficult to confirm any specifics while we remain within the capital's barrier. An illusion effect. Helion muttered, discomfort flickering across his face. If that's the case, I'll need personnel from the 4th Division to reinvestigate. Reeve, standing at attention, quickly replied. The 4th Division commander has already conducted a reinvestigation, Your Majesty. Helion nodded, his mind quickly shifting gears. Then we'll form a temporary investigation team. Use the elves as the core of the group. They have the highest terrain suitability. Make sure to consider the unique challenges of this environment. Understood, sir. Reeve replied, though her concerned expression remained. She hesitated for a moment before adding, I will relay your orders to the commanders. The Helion paused, catching the hesitation in her voice. 8th Division conducted aerial reconnaissance around the perimeter. They reported that the forest is dense in all directions except to the north, where it appears slightly less thick. However, it's still difficult to affirm any further details while we remain within the barrier, but as she spoke, Helion suddenly froze. His sharp gaze turned to Reeve. The dragons, Your Majesty, they've been complaining. They want to fly higher and scout farther beyond the forest. Helion narrowed his eyes, and I told them no, Reeve replied flatly. The order was to avoid provoking any potential countries in the area, and they didn't seem to understand it. So, she paused briefly. I hit them to keep them quiet. Moving on with her report, Reeve continued. Regarding the kingdom's order, everything is currently well maintained. However, the Ogre faction that recently joined. Helion interrupted abruptly. Wait. Reeve stopped mid-sentence, looking puzzled. What's the matter, Helion-sama? Helion's eyes widened in disbelief. He's just now. I didn't use any keywords, did I? Reeve tilted her head, slightly confused. Keywords, what are those? A chill ran down Helion's spine. His voice trembled slightly as he said, I was just thinking aloud, and yet you're responding to me naturally. Reeve blinked, concern flickering in her expression. Were your words orders that I misunderstood? Helion's mind raced. No, that's not it. Wait, but this shouldn't even be possible. An NPC replying on its own without using system keywords. Reeve's confusion only deepened as she apologized again. If I said something unnecessary or interrupted your contemplation, I sincerely apologize, Helion-sama. Still in a state of shock, Helion rushed to access the game's master support system. He summoned the game master multiple times but was met nothing but silence. Every attempt yielded the same result, no response. He muttered to himself, trying to keep his growing panic under control. Calm down. Just calm down. There has to be an explanation for this. Noticing his distressed state, Reeve leaned closer, her concern evident. Helion-sama, are you alright? You don't look well. Before he could reply, she moved even closer and placed her forehead gently against his to check for signs of illness. Helion froze, his mind struggling to process what was happening. As her forehead touched his, a wave of warmth radiated from her skin. In that moment, Helion reached out instinctively and touched her cheek. The sensation was soft, warm, and unmistakably real. Reeve's face turned bright red. Flustered, she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Meanwhile, Helion's thoughts spiraled. This is impossible, he muttered inwardly. There's no way this is happening. The full sensory projection system allowed players to feel sensations like touch, warmth, and even texture. But they were artificial, coded sensations designed to mimic reality. Yet now, as his fingertips rested on her cheek, he could feel something distinctly different. Her breath brushed against his skin, warm and delicate. Her cheeks were gradually turning crimson And there was even a subtle, sweet scent emanating from her, scent so unique it was unmistakably real. His mind scrambled for explanations. First theory. A version upgrade had been secretly implemented in Tactics Chronicle. Perhaps the eye systems had been evolved to a new level, improving the full sensory projection system to the point where it was indistinguishable from reality. While lost in thought, Reeve watched him silently, her concern growing with each passing second. Second theory. This was a grand-scale prank orchestrated by the game developers. Maybe this wasn't even a game anymore. What if this was reality and Reeve was just someone cosplaying as her character? It could be the ultimate surprise event from the developers. Something so elaborate it defied belief. Third theory, the one that sent a shudder through his entire body. This situation was eerily similar to a theme that had become wildly popular in internet novels half a century ago. It was a common trope in which the protagonist is transported to a world that mirrors a manga, anime, or game. As the thought crossed his mind, Helian's body tensed. His heart raced as the implications sank in. Could this really be that? But he was interrupted when Leave asked him to take a seat, mentioning she would call the 3rd Division commander right away. He stuttered, Don't, I'm fine. But Leave persisted, her voice filled with concern. Helian-sama, you need to be checked. This isn't normal. Helian, growing frustrated, snapped, Enupt. I told you I'm fine. Leave me be and continue gathering information. Reluctantly, Leave bow ahead. Her worry still evident, but she finally excused herself and left the room. Helian let out a deep breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had screamed at her more than he intended to. Trembling, he reached for his terminal and selected immediate emergency logout option, pressing it over and over, but there was no reaction. No response at all. After a few minutes of futile attempts, Helian took a step back and tried to self-hit-calm as his mind drifted back to morning when the game had first been released. He could still remember it clearly. The excitement in his voice as he shouted, "This is where our adventure begins." Those words, once filled with enthusiasm and anticipation, now carried a new weight. They held a different meaning in this strange, unsettling moment.
Tactics Chronicle is a fantasy strategy RPG, standing apart from typical war games in several intriguing ways. In this world, the kings are not the mighty warriors you might expect. Instead, their combat abilities are either equal to or even weaker than those of ordinary humans in the real world. Their stats cannot be improved, and their attack power is set to 0. Simply put, in Tactics Chronicle, the subordinates hold the strength, while the kings are the weakest of all. At the king's command, the division commanders had gathered to hear his counsel. Helian, the king, instructed them to raise their heads and expressed his gratitude for their swift response. Although there were faces among them he hadn't seen in a long time, he made it clear that there was no time to celebrate their reunion. The situation was urgent and they needed to act quickly. Internally, Helian wrestled with his concerns about his demeanor. He knew he needed to project the image of a noble and authoritative ruler, even if it didn't come naturally to him. Pushing his doubts aside, he gave the floor to Balun, one of his trusted commanders, to report on the calamities that had recently struck their kingdom. Balun, the 2nd Division commander, also known as the Sword Lion, stepped forward. His tone was measured as he explained the situation. Security had remained intact, he assured, but several citizens had been injured during the recent incident. Fortunately, the people had started to regain their composure, stabilizing the immediate aftermath. Helian listened intently, his thoughts turning to Balun's many qualities. As the leader of the Beast Knights, Balun was known for his unwavering chivalric spirit, trait deeply rooted in his character. He was a disciplined and professional commander, someone Helian trusted implicitly. In moments like these, Balun was the ideal figure to maintain order in the kingdom and reassure its people. Helian thanked Balun for his detailed report and turned his attention to the next commander. Eltina, 3rd Division commander and ancient elf, please give your report, he said. Eltina bowed slightly, her voice calm and steady. Understood, Your Majesty, she responded before beginning her report. As of this moment, all of the injured have been treated by the medical unit of the 3rd Division. Additionally, during the inspection of the capital's barrier, I noted something unusual. The main road, which should extend out from the outer wall's main gate, has disappeared. Outside the city, everything has been replaced by a dense forest. As she spoke, Helian's thoughts wandered momentarily. As I suspected, he mused, NPCs other than Leave also possess an ego. Eltina continued, detailing her findings. The forest is cloaked with an illusion effect. Unfortunately, I was unable to break through it, she admitted, her tone tinged with frustration. Helian considered her words carefully before responding. In that case, he said, let us assume for now that our kingdom is hidden from the outside world. Our immediate goal is to investigate the situation thoroughly and gather information on the surrounding areas as quickly as possible. All of this must be done while keeping our kingdom's presence concealed. Exercise extreme caution to avoid provoking other nations unnecessarily. The gathered commanders responded in unison with an obedient yet sharp "Yes, Majesty." Helion observed their disciplined reply, though doubts gnawed at the edges of his mind. "I've issued a cautious plan. Fortunately, no one has objected, but do they think of me as a coward?" He quickly pushed the thought aside. Turning to leave, he asked, "Can the 4th Division, with their elite magicians, break through the forest's illusion?" Leave, standing tall and exuding confidence, replied with a composed voice, "I have received a report from the 4th Division commander. They have confirmed that breaking the illusion will take time. The magic formula appears to follow an unknown system, making it difficult to decipher quickly." Helion nodded at her response, though his concerns deepened. Leave, the commander of the elite guard forces and supreme overseer of all 8 divisions, was renowned for her bravery. Her role was not only to assist the king in various fields, but also to act as his unwavering shield. She carried herself with a presence that inspired loyalty and determination among the kingdom's forces. Leave continued her report, her tone calm but firm. "However, the 4th Division commander has proposed another option. If permitted, they could brute force the illusion by either erasing the entire forest with ritual magic or overriding its terrain with powerful topographical magic." Hilion's expression grew stern. "Brute forcing is not allowed," he said decisively. "Such actions would undoubtedly expose our kingdom's existence if there are threatening forces nearby. Even if we've already been noticed, there's no need to increase that possibility further. We won't act rashly." Leave nodded in agreement. "It is as you say, Your Majesty. I've already replied to the commander with, 'Restrain yourself, muscle brain.' I'll notify her further that Helion Sama has issued an official ban on brute forcing." Despite the seriousness of her tone, Helion couldn't help but notice her tail wagging uncontrollably behind her. While she appeared as dignified as ever, her tail betrayed her emotions. Helion found it oddly endearing and useful. At least her tail made it easier to gauge her mood. "Well done, Leave," Helion said, exhaling a small sigh of relief. He paused for a moment, reflecting. "There's a reason I pay such close attention to each of my subordinates' expressions," he thought. "In this world, rebellion is not just a possibility. It's a system within the game. If their happiness falls too low and their loyalty drops below a certain threshold, they might revolt." The thought of a rebellion, his powerful monster-like subordinates turning against him, a weak human, was unsettling. But Helion pushed the worry aside. He had to stay focused. "I understand the situation," Helion said, his voice steady. To avoid provoking foreign countries, we must rely on careful and direct investigation. We can't afford to take unnecessary risks. That said, we will now need to use our feet to gather information." Turning to another of his commanders, Helion issued his next order. 6th Division Commander, I assign your unit to this investigation." Camilla, the 6th Division commander, stepped forward with a slight smirk, her demeanor confident and perhaps a little too playful. "My lord," she began in a tone dripping with sensuality, "if that is your order, our division will give everything we've got. That is only natural. However," she paused for dramatic effect, "if you're asking me whether we can investigate the forest or not, then I must say there will be a problem." Helion blinked in surprise. He repeated, shocked by her response. The 6th Division, led by Camilla, had been created during the Cold War between nations. Their unit was unrivaled in gathering information, their efficiency and stealth unparalleled. For Camilla to express hesitation was deeply unexpected. Camilla lowered her head slightly, her voice tinged of regret. "I must apologize for showing a lack of power, my lord," she said. "The monsters affiliated with the 6th Division, including myself, have never explored uncharted areas. I must admit, I have no confidence in accomplishing this mission." Helion's expression remained calm, but internally his thoughts raced. "I've gone and done it." While the 6th Division certainly excels in espionage, that's a completely different matter. Their abilities are specialized for infiltrating enemy nations, utilizing social skills to gather information, exploring areas where no one has set foot is far outside their expertise. Camilla, sensing the tension, looked uneasy. "It's not that I am refusing," she added quickly, her tone laced with concern. "If there is no one else suitable for the job, we of the 6th Division will do something about it." Before she could say more, Helion interrupted her with a warm smile. "No, your concern is valid," he said, his voice reassuring. "In situations like these, I prefer honest statements. Thank you for your advice, Camilla." Camilla's expression softened, though traces of worry lingered on her face. "Yes, my lord. Thank you for your kind words," she replied, bowing slightly. As Camilla stepped back, Helion took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I need to act like a king," he reminded himself, pushing aside his doubts. He turned his attention to Leave, Balun, and Eltina. "Do any of you recall investigating unexplored areas in the past?" he asked, his gaze shifting between them. The 3 commanders nodded in unison. "Yes, We remember, they replied confidently. Helion considered this. If that's the case, the best course of action is to send out a few elite troops who have the highest chances of returning. Depending on the results, I can make a more informed decision moving forward. With a decisive nod, he began issuing orders. Balun, you will remain in the kingdom and maintain order. Leave and Eltina, I assign you both to lead the investigation of the unknown areas. Yes, Majesty, they shouted in unison, their voices filled with determination. Helion nodded approvingly, then added, You've all grown much stronger since we first started. I'm confident in your abilities. I know you two can handle this mission. Though he projected confidence, Helion's thoughts lingered on his role, relieving the tension of my subordinates, especially when they're about to embark on such an important mission, is also my duty as their king. Helion continued, his tone steady but his mind uneasy. Do not fret. The only difference compared to your first expedition is that Balun won't be coming with you. The room fell silent, and Helion noticed the shocked expressions on their faces. He blinked, confused. Did I say something weird? Trying to suppress his unease, he pressed on. A's, for the 6th Division, you shall continue to collect and manage domestic information. Prepare yourselves, Leave and Eltina. Both Leave and Eltina replied reluctantly, understood. Their hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Helion couldn't help but wonder, is it just my imagination or have they become more nervous? Did I say something wrong again? After a moment of silence, he concluded, that is all. The rest of you shall resume your normal duties. Yes, Majesty, the commanders replied in unison, but Helion noticed the nervousness lingering on their faces. As he dismissed them, he thought to himself, there's no point in worrying about what's already happened. I just have to keep moving forward. With that, Helion left the chamber, the commanders bowing deeply as he departed. Once the door closed behind him, the room fell quiet. Then, Camilla let out a long, exaggerated sigh of relief. Our lord is so elegant as always, she murmured wistfully. If we weren't in this situation, I would have loved to talk more with him. Balun shot her a sharp look. That is imprudent, 6th Division Commander, he said sternly. Camilla turned to him, her face twisting in irritation. It was just if we weren't in this situation, you blockhead. She snapped. Then, with a huff, she added, and first of all, it's unfair. It has been 3 years since I've had an audience with my lord. Balun folded his arms and replied calmly, it can't be helped. The other commanders have strong personalities. The only ones who can stay in the capital peacefully are the first 3. Camilla scoffed, turning her nose up at his remark. Stop exaggerating. You might not be aware since you're a man, but Levy's hobbies and tastes are far from decent. I wouldn't be surprised if Eltina's are the same. The room tensed as a chilling voice broke through. What are you implying, Camilla? Eltina said, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an icy glare. Would you care to explain? Camilla hesitated, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. There's nothing to explain, she stammered. Eltina took a step forward, her voice sharp and commanding. Kneel, she said bluntly. Camilla's face turned pale. Why? You're telling me to kneel, she asked, her voice faltering as she looked for an escape from Eltina's piercing gaze. Eltina's expression grew darker, her voice firm and commanding. Kneel. Camilla, now trembling with fear. She hesitated but slowly shuffled toward Eltina, lowering herself to her knees. Eltina loomed over her, crossing her arms. Now, what did you mean by saying it's probably the same for me as well? Reluctantly, Camilla stammered. I meant how you, like women. Eltina's brows furrowed, and she retorted, that is a very misleading way of putting it. I like men, just like any normal woman. It's just that I also enjoy cuddling cute girls. Camilla blinked nervously and muttered under her breath, Shh, you're already not normal the moment you said that. Eltina snapped back. That's not true. I'm perfectly normal. Even His Majesty once muttered something along those lines. Camilla's eyes widened in shock. What? Said that? My lord said that? Eltina nodded confidently. Yes. If Helion-sama were here, he would probably say something like, besides, a girl's expression when she's on the verge of tears is very precious. After all, there's nothing cute than a girl who is just about to cry. Camilla shuddered, her face filled with disbelief. Slowly, she turned toward Balun for support, but he averted his gaze, pretending not to notice. You're a coward, Balun! She exclaimed. Exasperated. Ignoring the remark, Balun looked toward Leave and asked, Leave, you've been unusually quiet. Do you have something on your mind? Leave hesitated for a moment before speaking. It's about His Majesty's decision to send us to explore the unknown areas. I can't help but feel that something is off about his words. Atmosphere in the room shifted. All of them adopted serious expressions. Eltina nodded solemnly. I see, so you thought the same. Leave. Camilla chimed in, her tone grave. You too. So it wasn't just my imagination. If we're all feeling the same way, then there must be something behind it. Camilla continued, I'll send a messenger to His Majesty. Would that be acceptable, Supreme Commander Leave? Leave replied, I will allow it, but suddenly, Leave turned to Eltina and said, Eltina, there's something I'd like to confess. Will you listen to me? Eltina's expression softened. What's wrong? Leave. Leave looked down, her ears twitching slightly as she spoke. I was bewildered when the force transfer happened. I was so concerned about Helion, Sama's safety, that I intervened unnecessarily. He was displeased with my actions. She paused, her voice lowering as she continued. But no matter what hardships Helion, Sama faces, he remains a great king. That will not change. He is none other than the king of Alchimaiera. All we have to do is listen to his orders and become his strength, the power that clears the path ahead. Eltina smiled warmly. I don't think it was wrong for you to be concerned about His Majesty. You care deeply, and that's not a fault. She placed a reassuring hand on Leave's shoulder. While they continued their conversation elsewhere, Helion was pacing back and forth, deep in thought. His mind replayed the events of the meeting, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made several mistakes. Did I mess up? He wondered. I tried my best to act like a king, but it didn't seem to work. I made so many blunders. I tried to appear strong, to avoid being seen as weak or unjust, but it didn't play out as I had hoped. Letting out a frustrated sigh, he stopped pacing and gazed out the window. It can't be helped now. I'll just have to focus on what I can do next. Helion steeled his resolve. Once Leave and Eltina set out, I'll think more carefully about the next course of action. Helion decided to head to the North Gate to observe the situation personally. It was something his old professor at the seminary always used to emphasize. Observation is necessary for those who stand above others. Helion smiled bitterly at the memory. I never expected those words would resonate with me in this way, let alone as a king at the age of less than 20. As he approached the gate, heated by a sight that left him speechless. A grand gathering was underway with a festive atmosphere that felt far too excessive for the occasion. What is this? This is way too flashy. Isn't this just a send-off for two commanders? His thoughts were interrupted when he turned toward Leave and Eltina. Their faces were serious, their expressions resolute. We've finished our preparations, Leave said firmly. We're ready to set out, Your Majesty. Helion nodded, though he still felt uneasy. Good. I'll see you off. Before he could finish, one of his maids approached and took his cloak. Confused, he glanced around as they began dressing him in armor. W, what's happening? He muttered. Another maid stepped forward to adjust his gauntlets. Leave stepped closer and, with a determined expression, declared, Helion Sama, no matter what happens, I will protect you with my life. Eltina nodded in agreement. I will fulfill my mission with the same resolve. My stature may be small, but I will do my best for Your Majesty and for our kingdom. Helion blinked rapidly, his mind racing. Wait, hold on a minute. Why are they changing my clothes? The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. This is almost like I'm going on the expedition myself, but I never said anything about that. His thoughts flashed back to his speech from earlier. Do not fret. The only difference compared to your first expedition is that Balan won't be coming with you. He froze. Oh no. Oh no. Did they interpret that as me saying I'll go in Balan's place? As if to confirm his fears, the crowd around the gate erupted into cheers. A booming announcement followed. Take heed, raise your swords. As of this moment, His Majesty the King will personally lead the expedition team and set forth. Helion's head spun as the reality of the situation sank in. He glanced toward Leave, hoping for some clarification or, better yet, a way out. But Leave's face was filled with determination, her resolve unwavering. Beside her, Eltina adjusted her staff and gave a firm nod. Helion sighed inwardly. It's been a while since I've explored an unexplored area. This takes me back. Why did this happen? Was it something I said? Isn't it strange? No matter how you look, for a king to lead in an expedition himself. Anyone please stop me. With no other choice, he forced himself to stand tall. Raising his voice to match the crowd's excitement, he shouted, Let us go then, Eltina! Both women responded in unison, their voices sharp and loyal. Wes, Your Majesty. With the crowd cheering behind them, Helion marched forward, outwardly embodying the role of a brave king. Inwardly, he couldn't help but dread what lay ahead. The expedition had already ventured deep into the forest. Both Leave and Eltina were on high alert, walking slightly ahead and to the sides of Helion, protecting him from any potential threat. Helion, on the other hand, was silently observing the surroundings, his mind swirling with thoughts. The entire area is dense with trees, he thought. We've been walking for now, and yet the scenery hasn't changed at all. The illusion effect is making it even harder to navigate, and the terrain itself is already confusing. Have I lost my sense of direction? As Helion pondered the disorienting nature of the forest, a faint disturbance came from nearby. Both Leave and Eltina immediately stopped in their tracks, their sharp gazes fixed in the direction of the sound. The disturbance, however, turned out to be nothing more than the illusion dissipating. The dense, otherworldly aura surrounding the forest began to fade. Helion narrowed his eyes. "It's turned into a normal forest," he remarked, noting the sudden change in the atmosphere. Eltina nodded. "Your Majesty, the illusion effect in this part of the forest has weakened considerably." Helion furrowed his brows. "Only this part is outside the illusion's influence," he thought. Could this be the boundary line? Does it become a normal forest from here onwards? While he was lost in thought, Leave suddenly spun around, her expression sharp and tense. "Something is coming this," she said, her tone laced with urgency. Helion froze as the sound of heavy footsteps drew closer. His heart pounded as a massive creature, 5 meters tall, with grotesque features and muscles rippling under its coarse fur, emerged from the shadows, and its glowing eyes locked onto the group with malicious intent. Helion's breath caught. This monster is massive. And the aura it's emitting is ferocious. This is our first encounter, and it had to be something like this. Before he could even give an order, a chilling presence radiated from Leave. The air around her grew heavy as she directed her murderous intent squarely at the monster. The creature immediately froze in place, its confidence crumbling under the sheer weight of her aura. It let out a pained scream, shaking in fear, and then, to Helion's utter amazement, the monster turned tail and fled into the forest. "It understood that it couldn't win against us," Leave said calmly, lowering her hand. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves, though inwardly he was both impressed and unnerved. As expected of the pinnacle of lycanthropes, Fenrir class Leave is far too powerful. Glancing at her, Helion thought back to her origins. "She was my first subordinate, the one I raised with great care. Of course, it's only natural for her to be leagues stronger than a stray monster." Eltina spoke up, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Your Majesty, I sense movement to the northeast." Helion quickly opened his tactical window and accessed the map. A set of dots appeared, glowing faintly white. He frowned. "Unknown entities," he muttered. "2 of them. One seems to be leading the way, while the other follows." Eltina nodded, her ears twitching slightly. "Wes, they're moving together, but I can hear a faint scream coming from the one in front." Helion stiffened. A scream. His sense of urgency spiked. "We need to get there immediately." They set off toward the source of the sound. Helion followed closely, his heart pounding. What could be happening up ahead? The forest grew denser as they moved, the canopy above darkening the path ahead. Helion's unease deepened with every step. On the other side of the forest, an unknown girl was running frantically, her breath coming in short gasps. Behind her, a beast, some kind of monstrous dog, was rapidly closing in, its growls and snarls filling the air as it chased her down. Meanwhile, Helion, Leave, and Eltina had reached the source of the noise. As they approached, they saw the girl desperate and frightened, trying to outrun the pursuing monster. "There they are!" Helion exclaimed. His gaze immediately fell on the beast closing in on the girl. Without hesitation, he ordered, "Eltina, intercept the pursuer." Eltina gave a sharp nod. "Understood." She quickly chanted a spell, raising her hand. "Oh, wind, become a running blade!" Wind blade. The spell shot out with precision, slicing through the air. The wind blade tore through the beast in a series of clean, swift cuts, and the dog's massive body was torn apart into several pieces. Helion stood in stunned silence. She killed it so easily with just a low-tier, spammable spell. He was shocked by the power of the magic, especially considering how effortlessly Eltina had dealt with the monster. The pieces of the beast lay motionless on the forest floor, confirming that it was indeed dead. The little girl, who had been running from the monster, now stood frozen wide-eyed. She had witnessed the display of magic with astonishment, especially the precision and speed at which Eltina had cast the spell. Helion turned to the girl, his expression softening. Are you hurt?" The elf girl, Cossenwary, hesitated before responding. Helion observed her closely, noting her pointed ears. An elf, he thought, surprised. The little girl quickly covered her ears as though trying to hide them, confirming his suspicion. She was indeed an elf. "Thank you for saving me," the girl said, her voice trembling, but she was still on edge. She kept her distance, watching Helion and his group carefully. Helion gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. We were on a journey and got lost in this forest. We just happened to hear your scream, and I'm glad we made it in time." Leave spoke up, introducing herself first. Altina followed suit, giving a respectful bow. "I am Altina. It's a pleasure to meet you." The elf girl eyed them cautiously, still unsure of their intentions. Altina smiled at Helion, then tugged at his sleeve. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. We aren't very good at talking to us, and I apologize, but I'll leave this to you," she said, stepping back. Helion, taken aback by her sudden withdrawal, thought to himself, well, it's my fault for putting all my hopes on her, but I feel emotionally betrayed. Damn it, do I have to be the one to talk to her after all? The little girl, confused, asked, "Are they your slaves? Am I wrong? Tell me." Helion replied calmly, "No, they're my traveling companions. They are not my slaves." The little girl hesitated, her expression uncertain. "Then why did you save me?" "I'm a half." Helion was taken aback. Half, he repeated, confused. The girl slowly uncovered her head, revealing pointed ears that marked her elven heritage. She spoke reluctantly. I am a half. Do you regret saving me now? Helion blinked in surprise. Why would I regret saving you? The girl, startled by his response, stammered. But didn't you save me because you thought I was an elf? Helion shook his head, his tone firm. What do you mean by that? What's the problem with being a half-elf? Before the girl could respond, a voice interrupted, cold and disdainful. That goes without saying. Everyone turned toward the voice, startled. An elf emerged from the forest, carrying the severed head the monstrous dog that had been chasing the girl. His expression was contemptuous as he stared at Helion and his group. It's because they're a tainted race. The elf continued, his tone dripping with scorn. He examined Helion carefully. I've not seen you around here. You don't seem to be an ordinary person. I can't believe you killed my hound so easily. Helion's eyes narrowed as he assessed the elf, who radiated hostility. The tension was palpable. Helion questioned the unknown elf. Hound, was that your familiar? The elf looked startled for a moment before narrowing his eyes and replying, Are you a human? He seemed surprised, muttering, I didn't expect a human to be here, especially this close to the abyss. Helion, confused by the mention of the abyss, asked, The abyss. However, he quickly brushed the question aside and continued, Never mind that for now. What did you mean earlier when you said tainted race? The elf scoffed, crossing his arms with an air of arrogance. You really don't know, do you? That girl is a half-elf. Unlike us pure elves, who are cherished by the gods and spirits, half-elves are abominations, fallen creatures born from the unholy union of an elf and a human. Humans are impure, barbaric beings whose only merit is their sheer numbers. In other words, half-elves are part of a tainted race. Hearing this, Lefe couldn't hold back her anger. You're wrong! We are not tainted, she shouted. The male elf turned to her with a look of fury, his voice dripping with venom. Nonsense! A mere half-breed like you dares to speak. Just hearing your voice is enough to make my ears rot. As the elf continued his tirade, Helion silently observed. He noted how the elf's outwardly dignified demeanor was marred by the same unsightly expression of disgust he had seen in humans. His thoughts raced as he tried to piece things together. Helion thought to himself, this elf may look noble, but his behavior mirrors the worst arrogance of humanity. However, there's something about this that troubles me. In the game, the human race was exclusively for kings. While there were humanoid demi-humans, like elves and dwarves, there were no humans aside from the players. Yet, this elf recognized me as a human immediately. That's a clear deviation from the game's setting. Still, now is not the time to dwell on that. I need to focus on gathering information. Helion redirected his attention to the elf. Why are you going after this little girl? What reason could you possibly have for attacking her? He asked. The elf sneered, his expression filled with malice. Reason? It's just for fun. Even though I destroyed their city, some of these half-breed rats managed to scurry away into the wilderness. I'm simply using them as target practice for my hounds. Helion was momentarily taken aback at the mention of a destroyed city. The elf continued with a smug tone. Half-elves are a tainted race. For them to create a city and even declare themselves a sovereign country, it's nothing but haughty arrogance. We, the pure elves, will make good use of that city. But first, we will purge their tainted blood. He paused before adding, Do you understand now, ignorant human? Helion maintained a calm demeanor, though his thoughts betrayed his frustration. Helion thought to himself, he's remarkably arrogant, especially considering he's outnumbered. Is he that confident in his abilities? Or does he simply underestimate us? Keeping his expression neutral, Helion replied, I see. I'm sorry, but I am only a traveler. This is my first time here, and I don't know much about the situation around these parts. Please excuse my ignorance. The elf smirked at his words. Oh, so you admit you're ignorant? Well, you may be a monkey, but at least you're an exceptional one, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Helion felt the air around him tense as the elf spoke again, his voice dripping with malice. However, It is too late to apologize. This is your punishment. You will die for the crime of interfering with my hunt. With that, the elf began to infuse his gauntlet with magic, preparing for an attack. Just as he was about to strike, the little girl stepped forward, shielding Helion with her small frame. She cried out, "Nuff! He is a human, not a monkey. Please leave us be. We were just trying to live peacefully on the edge of the forest. You drove us far from the abyss and the wilderness, and still we were just desperately trying to survive. Yet why? Why are you doing this to us?" Her words were heavy with sorrow, tears flowing down her cheeks like an unstoppable river. The male elf, now visibly enraged, shouted, "I told you to stop talking! I've had enough of your pathetic whining. I'll silence you for eternity." With those words, he unleashed his two hounds towards the little girl and Helion, their ferocious growls filling the air. Helion, gripped by a surge of protective instinct, stepped forward without thinking. "What am I doing?" he thought, his heart pounding in his chest. "Am I trying to die? The wind is deafening. My ears are being crushed from the sheer noise. I regret this decision deeply, but it's too late to back down now." As his thoughts spiraled, a powerful wind barrier suddenly encased him, blocking the oncoming attacks. The chant of wind protection had come just in time, and Helion realized it was Altina who had cast the spell. Before he could catch his breath, Altina continued her assault, her voice firm as she invoked another spell. Liana Bind. Vines erupted from the ground, quickly wrapping around the male elf, restraining him completely. He struggled, but the magic held him fast. Still furious, the male elf ordered his hounds to focus on Altina, commanding them to kill the magic caster. But before they could move, a blur of motion passed by them. Leave, with astounding speed, cut through the three hounds, severing their heads with a single, swift strike. Without hesitation, she charged at the male elf, her intent clear to end him with a single punch. All this time, both Leave and Altina had been carefully observing their surroundings, holding back their impulses. They understood the importance of gathering information, especially when dealing with forces that were clearly hostile. They had endured the insults, the degradation, knowing that Helion's goal was to learn more about the situation they were in. That's why Altina had kept her smile in place, masking the hostility and disgust she felt, while Leave had suppressed her instinct to fight. But now, with the battle ignited, their true selves came forward, unrestrained and ready for action. Helion immediately commanded, "Leaf, wait!" The unknown elf, clearly startled and struggling against the magical vines, demanded, "What are these vines? What just happened?" Helion remained calm and addressed him firmly. "Hey, I'm letting you off the hook this time. We don't wish to fight you. You were the one who attacked us first. We simply protected ourselves. Do you understand?" The elf stared at him in shock, his pride visibly wounded. Helion continued, "I'm telling you, I'm letting you off the hook." But the elf's face twisted in fury. "You insolent wretch! You're just a mere human! How dare you order me around? Do you even know who I am? I am the glorious hunter chief of Noble Wood." Helion, his patience wearing thin, retorted, "I don't care who you are!" "I'll say it one more time. Are you really going to make this a big deal?" Altina, noticing Helion's growing frustration, released her vines. The elf stumbled but quickly regained his balance. Though clearly seething, he reluctantly backed away with a spiteful glare before disappearing into the forest. Helion let out a quiet sigh of relief, his mind racing. That was dangerous. I could have been killed just now. I can't afford to get into fights with unknown forces when I still know so little about this world. That was way too close for comfort. The little girl he had saved clung to his arm and exclaimed, "Thank you so much! I'm glad you're okay." But inside he thought, crap. I just ordered Leaf to stop as if I'm a superior right in front of this girl. That's going to ruin the story about us being just travelers. In a quick attempt to cover his tracks, Helion said, "Actually, they're my bodyguards. You see, I'm just a handyman. Definitely not much of a fighter. Haha." The little girl, who had been wary of them, suddenly let out a soft chuckle. Helion raised an eyebrow in confusion. "What's so funny?" She quickly apologized, stifling her laughter. "I'm sorry. It's just, you were acting so tough in front of that elf, but now you seem so flustered in front of someone like me. It's just funny." Helion scratched the back of his head, bewildered. The girl continued, "You don't have to mind me. You can talk to me the same way you were talking to that elf. Still surprised, Helion replied, "Ah, sure." She smiled warmly and said, "By the way, my name is Lifa. Thank you once again for saving me. Twice." Helion waved it off casually. "Don't worry about it. We were just protecting ourselves. You don't have to thank," insisted. "But Lifa, even so, it doesn't change the fact that you saved me. So please, let me express my gratitude." She hesitated before asking shyly, "May I ask for your name?" Helion let out a small, relieved smile and replied, "I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier." "My name is Helion." Lifa smiled back. "Once again, thank you, Helion." They shook hands, a sense of calm finally settling over the group after the tense encounter. Helion, now slightly more at ease, continued to ask questions. "So, who was that elf from earlier?" Lifa, her tone growing somber, replied, "He was an elf from the Noblewood Kingdom. They're the ones who attacked our city." "Noblewood Kingdom?" Helion muttered before asking, "And your country?" "Our country is called Latest Root," Lifa said. "Though it's really just a city-state, one city and a few small settlements. I suppose you could think of it as a kind of safe haven. It was founded around 30 years ago by someone like me." A half-elf. Helion tilted his head, intrigued. 30 years ago, that's quite recent. Lifa nodded. "Yes. The existence of half-elves only became widely known around 30 years ago as well. The number of half-elves began increasing rapidly after events that took place about 100 years ago. Before that, half-elves were extremely rare." "What happened 100 years ago?" Helion asked, his curiosity deepening. Lifa took a deep breath and explained, 100 years ago, an interspecies war broke out between the elves and humans. At first, the elves were winning thanks to their surprise attacks and superior magic. However, they were eventually overwhelmed by the sheer number of humans. The elves suffered humiliating defeat after defeat and were forced to retreat, being pushed back in the Great Forest by the massive coalition army of humans. Helion's expression hardened as she continued. "After years of fighting," Lifa said, "a ceasefire agreement was finally formed 5 years later. But during those 5 years," she paused, her voice trembling, "what do you think happened to the captured female elves?" Helion's face darkened. Even without her answering, he could sense where this was going. The atmosphere grew heavy as everyone in the group silently grasped the implication. Lifa's voice was filled with sorrow as she confirmed their worst fears. "They were victims of war. Female elves are considered extraordinarily beautiful by human standards. Many of them were taken as spoils of war and handed over to aristocrats and high-ranking soldiers. They were treated as sexual slaves." The group listened in silence as Lifa continued, her hands clenched into fists. When the ceasefire agreement was made, the humans returned most of the surviving elves to their homeland. But among them, there were those who were already pregnant victims of repeated violations. Many gave birth to children conceived by humans. And those children, she hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. "Those children were our ancestors. Even though I say ancestors, it's only been about 4 generations since then." Helion's discomfort was evident as he processed her words. He had read about war and conflict before, but hearing this first then felt unbearably raw. Lifa continued her story, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Half-elves were never accepted by the elves. It's only natural, I suppose. The elves hate humans. Knowing that human blood flows within use, it disgusts them. In fact, they began hating us half-elves even more than the humans themselves." Helion frowned and asked hesitantly, "Hun, what about humans? How did they treat half-elves?" Lifa sighed. "It was similar but not quite as bad. The humans treated us slightly better than the elves did. But still, there were no humans who saw us as equals. Among the humans who ventured into the forest, there were a few kind individuals who treated us with compassion. But there were also humans who sought to kidnap us." She paused for a moment before adding, "Not all humans are like that, though. I try to remind myself of that." In Tactics Chronicle, there was no such history. Sure, there were NPC groups of elves, but there was no mention of an interspecies war happening 100 years ago. Turning to Lifa, he asked, "So, the elves from Noblewood are targeting the half-elves of Latest Root?" Lifa nodded. "We only wish to live peacefully. Our capital was located near human territory, but even so, the humans never really bothered us. However, 3 weeks ago, the forces from Noblewood suddenly attacked us." Helion's expression grew serious. "Do you know why they attacked?" "I don't know," Lifa admitted. "They proclaimed that they took up arms to govern the city in the way under what they called true noble bloodlines. But I don't believe any of that." Helion considered this for a moment. "Perhaps they're trying to claim more territory and imperation to fight against the humans. But even so, do the elves have any real chance of winning against humans now?" Lifa hesitated before replying, "Maybe, but it would be very difficult. I can't imagine their forces are significantly stronger than they were 100 years ago. And they destroyed our city too much to use it as a strategic base. Besides, if they just wanted to claim territory, they wouldn't have bothered chasing after those of us who escaped." Her voice trembled slightly as she added, "It feels like they were targeting us specifically for who we are." Helion nodded solemnly. "The fact that your capital was attacked without a declaration of war probably means they were targeting someone of significant importance, like the king, or a leader of similar standing." Lifa's face darkened as she explained. "Core country follows a matrilineal royal system, so we had a queen as our leader. But the queen of latest root and the prince consort went missing during the attack. The queen wasn't as skilled in magic as the elves of noble wood, but she was an influential leader who united everyone and founded our country. I want to believe she's still alive, but she's probably been captured by the elves." Helion clenched his fists. Not only was their capital taken, but their leader has gone missing as well. They're completely on the losing side of this war. If there's any way to deal with this situation, it would be to gather those who managed to escape, form an alliance with other forces, and initiate a counterattack. He glanced at Lifa, her young face etched with worry and fear. But how can they possibly fight back when they're hated by both humans and elves? That's exactly why they built their own country in the first place. They had no one else to turn to. Lifa suddenly said, "Could you wait here for a bit?" Helion replied, "I don't mind," she explained. "We'll arrive at our settlement in about 10 minutes. If I take you with me to the settlement without warning, everyone will be surprised. That's why I want to let them know beforehand, to avoid any unnecessary panic." Helion nodded. That would be helpful. But suddenly Altina stepped in front of Helion, her expression tense. "Your Majesty, a magic circle! Please be on your guard, just in case." The little girl, Lifa, began to chant as a large magic circle appeared around her. She spoke in an ethereal voice. "Friend, oh my friend." Helion thought to himself, is this summoning magic? But I've never heard of such a chant. This magic isn't like anything implemented in Tactics Chronicle. It's the same as earlier with that elf. The more I learn, the more this world deviates from my knowledge. Lifa continued to spell, her voice steady. "If you desire me, approach near. Use my voice as the guiding light and come here." Call fellow. With those final words, the magic circle pulsed and a female elf appeared. She was startled, taking a step back before crying out, "Lifa-sama! Are you okay?" The elf's gaze quickly shifted to Helion and his companions. Her expression hardened and she pointed her bow toward them. "An elf and a human?" she exclaimed. Lifa immediately shouted, "Lower your bow, Wenli! These people are travelers who saved me!" Wenli, her voice sharp with anger, responded, "I cannot make exceptions for them. The three anthropes are one thing, but the elf and human, this is an order." Lifa interrupted, her voice firm. "Lower your bow now." Reluctantly, Wenli lowered her weapon, her expression filled with resentment and distrust. While this was happening, Helion thought to himself, this young girl is giving orders to an older woman. What did she mean by Lefa? Sama. Lifa turned back to Helion, her expression apologetic. "I'm terribly sorry. The people in our settlement are angry and on edge after everything that's happened. I apologize again for Wenli's improper behavior," Helion replied calmly. "It's fine. There's no need to worry about it." He then asked, "Lifa, could I ask you something?" Lifa nodded. "What is it?" "Your full name," Helion said. "Could you tell me your full name?" Lifa smiled softly. "Gladly. My full name is Lifa Rim Latestwood. If we walk a bit further, we will reach my country. As an individual and as a member of royalty, I welcome you."